This happened last year. When I was 15, me and my friend, I'll call her Kate, were messing around in our neighborhood one day. We were on the side of the road, playing around with sparkles and other stuff like that. Suddenly, Kate said to turn around and look behind me. I did, and when I looked at the home behind us, I saw someone looking through the window. I couldn't really tell what he looked like, so I just ignored it and turned around. A few minutes later, Kate said to look again. I did, but this time, there was a woman with him at the window. They were just staring at us, and I began to feel uneasy. But again, I turned around and ignored them. As the sun went down, I walked back to my house, which was across the street, and Kate went to hers, which was a few blocks away. A couple hours later, at around 10, my phone lit up. I was watching Orange is the New Black, so at first, I ignored it. Then, I got another alert, so I picked up my phone and looked at the screen. My 2 alerts were from Snapchat. Someone added me, and their username was something like Jaden, with a few numbers after it. And then they sent me a picture. I waited until the episode was over to open it. It was just a black screen, with a message saying, "Hey." I ignored that message. Around 6 or 7 minutes later, I got another Snapchat from the same guy, and this time, it was a black screen saying, "Why didn't you answer?" Again, I ignored the snap and went back to Netflix. When my phone buzzed again, I didn't look at all. Throughout the episode, I got around 4 more alerts, which I all ignored. Then, I fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I had 11 alerts. Most of them were black screens saying, "Why aren't you answering?" or, "I know you're awake. Answer me." But the last one is what really freaked me out. It was a picture of my house, taken from across the street, with a caption, "Answer me now." I was stupid, so I didn't screenshot the pictures, but I did block him. I didn't hear anything for a few days, but then I got another alert that someone added me. It was the same username as before, but with a 1 after it. Then, I got sent multiple snaps. I didn't open any of them because I was in class. 4 hours later, I checked my Snapchat. All the pictures he sent me were pictures of me. Some were during lunch, and some were when I was walking home from school. Again, I blocked the user, and I didn't get any screenshots last night. I got a snap of my window, again, taken from across the street and from the same user, but this time with a 2 after it. I told my dad, and he freaked out and called the police. When they arrived, I told them everything, but they couldn't do anything since I didn't get any screenshots. I don't know what to do. For starters, my name is Jade. I am currently 12 years old, and I live in Colorado. I live in a neighborhood with low to no crime. This happened to me about a year ago. I was doing my nightly routine of showering, brushing teeth, and going to bed. While I was getting dressed, I heard a loud bang on my bathroom window. Before I go on, let me explain the layout of my bathroom. When you walk into the bathroom, you see the bathtub right away. To the right of you, there's the counter and a sink. And next to the counter, there's the toilet. The small window in my bathroom is right above my shower. So as I was saying, I heard a loud bang on my window. At first, I thought it was my mom trying to scare me. But when I walked out of my bathroom, I saw my mom sitting on the couch. In confusion, I asked my mother if she had been in the backyard, but in the middle of my sentence, we both heard a loud bang on the sliding glass door. My mom told me to get into the laundry room. My laundry room has no windows. My auntie then got her gun and walked outside. My auntie then comes back in a minute later, and she told me she saw footprints leading up to the electric box. I then got sick to my stomach, realizing the person was probably watching me shower. Then I started getting dressed, and they banged on the window. Several months after this incident, I've had people jumping our fence in the middle of the night and walking around the front of our house. I now have a fear of taking showers at night. But to the person who was watching me shower, let's not meet again. This is a true story about an ex-friend of mine. I tried to help through his terrifying obsession with a girl, but to no avail. I've always been the type to observe everything from a safe distance. Seldom am I ever brought into drama, but people come to me for advice a lot. I've given my best and most sound counseling to my friends. But this particular guy I knew was beyond any form of help. The guy in question, we'll call him Andy, made no point to cover up his psychotic behavior. From mumbling out loud to himself in public, to being physically harmful, Andy was quite the basket case. I started out knowing very little about him because I mainly kept to myself. And come gym class, when we'd walk the track, I'd have my headphones in most of the time. When a girl began walking around the track with him and conversing with him, I instantly noticed, as I would overhear them talking about some metal bands I coincidentally enjoyed. I'm not really sure how I wound up in this group, but maybe one of them made a move to hang out with me. Possibly my hilarious gay friend Mac. This group consisted of Andy the Psycho, Krista, Mac, and 2 other girls apart from myself. We had our subgroups. Krista and the other 2 girls were heavily into anime, whilst Mac and I would get into deep conversations about the mysteries of life. Andy, on the other hand, mostly sat and listened to Krista. He had an obvious fixation on her, and by the middle of the school year, everyone, including Krista, knew how desperate he was for her. Krista stated that she did not date, as her father was very protective, and to be honest, she kind of gave off a lesbian vibe anyway. Despite her efforts to pull away from him, Andy was practically on top of her, forcing hugs she awkwardly yanked away from, and making it known that he wanted her. On one occasion, she'd block his number after realizing it was a mistake to give it to him. He managed to steal her phone and unblock his number, and upon confrontation, he admitted to blocking his twin brother's number in her phone. Andy absolutely hated his twin, and never wanted to be compared to him, which would be expected as his brother was the charismatic one with lots and lots of friends. Yet Andy said on multiple occasions he'd wished his brother dead and joked about the joyful thought of killing him. I didn't judge harshly at first, but my friend Mac did. He would let Andy know what a creep he was. One time, Krista and Andy were talking as he'd taken his seat right beside her. He was telling her not to talk to his brother, and somewhere in the conversation, right in the library, he slapped her for not listening. I'll never forget the fear and anger on her face, and from then on, even after his awkward apology, Krista let him know he should stay away. Unfortunately, he'd taken too long of talking, as I've always been a soundboard whether I cared to be or not. Every day on the bus, it was Krista, Krista, Krista. Some days, he'd just chant her name and get lost in his own thoughts of her. I would try to drop subtle hints that she's not interested, or, at the very least, to treat her normal and give her space. Apart from his desire for Krista, he was the most desperate guy I'd ever met. He would ask out every girl he met and spoke to for about a day. He would message me on Facebook about how he needed a girlfriend. And luckily, I'd been in a relationship for 4 years by then, and he knew he couldn't have me. That still didn't stop him from hitting on me in such menial ways I didn't even realize at first, including a near proposal. He'd once just typed my name. When I asked him what was up, he simply said, "You're beautiful, but you look exactly like someone from my past, and it makes me sad remembering her every time I look at you. I miss her." He definitely had a knack for making people uncomfortable, and some days I couldn't help but ignore him. Krista evaded him till high school graduation, but Andy's obsession only seemed to intensify. I genuinely thought he couldn't be helped, and could get through to him whilst keeping my own distance, but he set off too many alarms. Firstly, he was training for some entry into a military boot camp of sorts, and was discharged for reasons in relation to his mental state, though he wouldn't get too far into it. Secondly, every day he would write me at weird times early in the morning to tell me, "Help, I can't stop thinking of her. I'm in love with her." This was clearly not true, as he'd made moves on me and other girls in the time he'd known her. He made many implications that he would self-harm to get her off his mind, but nothing worked. He'd also somehow convinced himself that she wanted him, and would frequent the grocery store she went to just to say hi, though she just kept her head down and ignored him. One morning, as I was browsing social media, he messaged me with the usual, "I need her. I love her. Help, I'm going crazy." I tried to help him analyze his feelings and come to his senses that he was fine and to let her be. I thought, if he's hitting on other girls, but claiming to love her, let's see what he says to this. So, I typed out, "Tell me, what do you truly love about her?" I cannot believe what he sent me next. It was the most ridiculous and degrading message I'd ever read about somebody, anybody. "She has such small breasts. I love that about her. I dream of taking her virginity, and I don't think she'd mind how small I am, if you know what I mean." I felt like I'd read some psycho's personal diary. Truthfully, this girl was tiny, 18 years old and not even 100 pounds, which made me fear that he'd prey on her. He was very short, but she appeared vulnerable and smaller than him. I was on the last straw, playing therapist for this guy who clearly had no idea what he was doing. Up to the last time we spoke, the worst thing he'd requested of me was to get a hold of Krista's new number, somehow, just for him, just so he could attempt to lure her to see her one more time. He grew frustrated with my decline and pleaded with me to help him obtain her address. Needless to say, the last night we spoke, I wished him well and told him I would not assist him in terrorizing Krista. Then, I blocked him, and it's been about a year since. I just hope he got the help he needed, and I hope for her sake he hasn't found out where she lived. This story didn't happen to me. It happened to my mother. I was just scrolling around on another Spooky Readers channel when I saw a video called Creepy College Stalker Stories. That title immediately caused me to remember something my mom once told me. I was a lot younger at the time, about 12 or 13, so I didn't think of it much. My mother is now 55 years old, and I'm currently 17. Now that I come to think about it, her story is a lot creepier than I first thought. I recall what caused her to start talking about this event, but let's go. Let me start off first by saying at the time of this story, my mother was going to college at Texas Tech. She was getting a law degree. I forgot which year she was in. One night, my mom was walking back from her tennis team's practice, thinking that she was all alone. There was no one on the streets, and the street lights were on. At one point, she started to feel suddenly uneasy, and decided to take a glance behind herself. What she saw made her become very wary. A tall, large man was walking behind her just a few meters away. I recall her mentioning that it wasn't strange to see another young adult walking around at night, but this person didn't seem very young. Judging by this man's build, she estimated he was somewhere around middle-aged. It definitely was not a college professor, since most of them aren't out at all at this time of night, and are much shorter than this man was. Just to double check that this was just a normal pedestrian and not a creeper, my mother decided to pick up the pace. She was now speed walking down the street. A loud sound of shoes hitting the ground behind her caused her to turn around and see the tall man was now sprinting towards her. Noping the fuck out of there, my mom booked it. Due to her being very athletic, she managed to stay a good 5 to 7 meters ahead of this guy. He was quite fast himself, taking sharp turns around the corner and running into her apartment building. She quickly unlocked the door, ran inside, and locked it. My mom didn't turn on the light, so the man wouldn't think she was in there. Next to the door, there were 2 large windows with see-through curtains. Peeking through the window, she saw the man approaching her apartment. Thinking quickly, my mom purposely fell to the floor and shuffled next to the wall, laying there so in case he were to look in, he wouldn't see her. Yep, that's exactly what he did. Apparently his shadow could be seen through the curtains as he leered in. The guy stayed there for what seemed to be like 30 minutes before backing away. A note was slipped under her door, and then he was gone. My mom didn't even get up until she knew for a fact he was indeed gone. Getting up and looking around, she double-checked to make sure the man was actually gone. He was gone. Feeling relieved that the guy had left, my mother decided to see what was on the paper. The piece of paper was blank, with only a few words written largely in the middle. The note read, "A hard man is good to find." Apparently, the creep had revered an old song, "A good man is hard to find," to that. Yeah, my mom went to the police the next day and filed a report. They took her statement and the note, and they said they'd keep an eye out. I don't recall if she caught the guy or not. The world will never know. My name is Annabelle, and I'm just like any other 18-year-old girl, I guess. But the only thing is, I have a stalker. You see, I was adopted by my adopted parents, and they are wonderful, but my birth parents are monsters. They use drugs and alcohol. My birth mother said she even used when she was pregnant. They abused me, neglected me, and so many other things. Then, one night, my birth father was really drunk and high, and then he murdered my birth mother. He went to jail, as you can imagine, for murder, and never for child abuse. He got out recently, though, you see, and he told my new parents that when he gets out, he's going to find me and take me back. Well, he lived up to his promise and found me. I've seen him outside my window. He sent me a text. I feel uneasy going home or leaving someone, and I feel like someone's always watching me. He wants me gone. You see, I want him back in jail, and he didn't even do his whole sentence. He has already threatened me before. I might be safe soon because me and my family are moving, but that won't stop him from finding me. He will return. This story happened to me from late July 2012 till late 2014, with ongoing issues for my safety. On that note, I would like to remain anonymous for the safety of myself. This all began late July of 2012. I come from a small town where everyone knows everyone. I had just turned 18, and as most 18-year-olds in my town, we would like to go drinking down the beach and have a bonfire. I would have my regular group of friends who I would hang with, and we would go for drives over the bigger city and find things to do. I was on one of my drinking nights with a close friend of mine. We'll call him Adam. So Adam and I went for a drive from my parents' house in the rural area of town and decided we wanted to go out to the big city to go watch a movie. After saying goodnight to the parents and hopping into Adam's car, we went to the movie theater and had a good time. After the movie had finished, we decided to go to McDonald's and get some grub. This is where I meet the man who ruined my life. He served my friend while I stood beside him at the counter, busying myself with my phone, texting my friends and whatnot, while Adam placed our orders. The guy who was serving us gave me a smile, and I smiled back as I said to my friend I was going to go have a cigarette. He nodded, and I went outside. Moments later, he walked out with our food, and the guy who had served us was walking behind him. He came and stood next to me and asked if he had a lighter and introduced himself. We shall call him Chris. So Chris sparked up a conversation and gave me his number and said he would like to take me out sometime for a movie or something. I agreed and made plans to see him the following weekend. After about a month of spending a lot of time with Chris and him coming out to my parents' place, we agreed to make our relationship official. He would spend most weeknights at my parents' house. I live in a granny flat on my parents' property, and drop me off at school in the morning, to the disgust of my friends who all caught the bus. One morning after Chris had stayed over and was driving me to school, I said to him that he should pull over next to a school bus, which was waiting for students to climb aboard. One of my friends was waiting next to the bus, so I stuck my head out the window and told her to climb in. This was mistake number 1, introducing the two of them. A few weeks after my friend met Chris, we broke up, and it was a messy breakup. Shortly after the breakup, the scary shit began to happen. I would hear people walking around the gravel driveway at random hours of the night. I would see Chris's car sitting down the end of my parents' road under the streetlight before I would go to bed. The stalking progressed to where I could hear him standing outside my ranch slider, talking to someone, then trying to jiggle open the garage door and walk around on the gravel. Things began to really become scary for me when I would receive phone calls and text from a random number during class about how this person was watching me as I would walk to the bus every morning and what my parents were doing throughout the day, and the threats with things like how they were going to break into my house and rape me and then hide my body somewhere deep in the forest where nobody would ever find me. At this time, I was studying for my end-year exams and preparing for university applications, and feeding all sorts of information to my friend, who we shall call Julia. She, unknowns to me, had been spending more time with Chris since the first introduction, when we gave her a lift to school. This was a fatal mistake on my behalf, because she knew exactly where I was going to be, what my timetables were, and when I would most likely be alone, and an easy target for Chris to come find me. They began to date, and the text became more frequent from the both of them. Even an attempt to harm me one evening when I was staying late with people from my drama class, working on our final performance for the year, and would be alone in an easily accessible classroom till about 10 p.m. Some of my classmates noticed his car parked across the road from where our classroom was, and said it looked like there was 2 figures sitting in the car, waiting for me to come out. I freaked and rang my mom and informed her. She came and collected me and took me home, watching the road to make sure they hadn't followed us. The shit really hit the fan when I became so scared that I had to go to the police about the messages I was receiving and the fact that there was someone coming onto the property trying to break in and harm me or my parents. Chris carried weapons in his car because he liked to hunt, and I knew it was also for security purposes because he was in the underground world of drugs. Once I had lodged a formal complaint against Chris and informed the police of his weapons he had on his person and in his home. So the police went around and had a look for anything, but they found nothing, which set him off even more. That evening he sat down the end of the road as per usual and waited for all the lights to go out. Then he came up along the front paddocks of the house and up the driveway. I was sleeping in my parents' living room, which is right beside the driveway, with the big open windows and ranch sliders to my brother's room. I heard him walk along the side of the house on the driveway and towards my flat, thinking I was in there, and I heard the sound of a gun being cocked. I sat up for a moment, thinking what I should do. I commando crawled down the hallway to my parents' room and quietly said to my mother, "Someone's outside. Mom, get up. There's somebody outside." My dad bolted upright, grabbed his robe and his .22 rifle, and ran out the kitchen door, setting off the sensor light, and bolted down the driveway, chasing after something running through the information paddock. After that night, things calmed down for about a month, till I was packing up to move 10 hours away to a new city. The night after I left, my mother rang to say someone had been in my house and had walked in with muddy boots on, because there was rather large footprints all through the house, as if somebody was trying to scope the place out. Odd things would happen at my parents' place, like trees would get cut down in the middle of the night, or a car would drive super slow past with its lights off at all odd hours of the night. Things started happening to me down at my new apartment. Each morning, when I would go out there would be a car always parked across the road, with windows tinted, out, and watching me. I would receive voicemails of violent nature from private random numbers. This kept up till late last year when it all stopped. No phone calls, no sightings of random cars, no odd things going on at my parents'. Every time I go home, I never tell anyone when I'm leaving and when I'll be back at my parents', for my own safety. I get flashbacks when I hear something like a car backfire, or I see a car similar to Chris's driving around. I always keep my home address private, and my phone number restricted for my own safety, because he is always hunting for me, and I don't want to put other people at risk. I always say to my mother, if I go missing, we know where to start looking. A little update on the last story. It was originally written at the end of 2015 and kept private because there had been a spark of activity. I had traveled home for the Christmas period. I was due for major surgery in January, which meant I couldn't spend time with friends or family after it, along with a death in the family. Stupidly, my sister had said to a few friends who are well known for not keeping their mouths shut and see Julia on a regular basis, that I was going to be home till mid-January. I wasn't actually at my parents' home till the end of January, but my father had an encounter with Chris. First time in 3 years we had seen him, and he had pulled up alongside one of the fences and stuck his head out of the window. This is normal to have people talking to my dad from their cars because we live in such a small, rural area, and we are rather close with our neighbors, who are all a fair distance away. He stuck his head out and asked if I was around, and that I was an old friend. My dad clicked instantly who it was, and said if he didn't leave right now, he's going to go grab his gun, and that's the end of it. Chris just laughed and said, "We both know you won't be doing that before I put 2 bullets in your head. Now where is she?" My dad, thinking on his feet, said I was in a hospital 3 hours away, and I'm now living in the biggest city north of my parents' house. He thanked my dad and said to him to watch his back. My dad didn't tell me this when I came home for recovery because he didn't want to stress me out, but I changed my cell phone number and made sure my social media was extremely tight with no geotags or anything that could potentially give away where I was. It's scary to know that someone still holds a grudge to this day because I know some extremely sensitive information about him,